Thanks, Janet, for that. Just before we give our attention to the slides, I think at this stage we should all know our technical guy's name. It's Yevgesh. If we can say hi to Yevgesh again. Yevgesh. Yeah. He's now my second best friend. So we're just waiting for Yevgesh to, but just to sort of give context to what I'm talking about. So the Spirit obviously communicates in a number of ways, personally and also in a communal form. And I think that, we're thinking along the lines of what we've been talking about in the last few days, in terms of justice and how the Spirit speaks in light of justice. And one of the things that I mentioned in my talk yesterday was the fact that we don't ordain women in our church, the congregation in Samoa. So what I will talk about is a bit of precedence that our elders don't often pay attention to. In fact, they ignore it completely, by way of a story. And if Yevgesh can get the slide going. The story is about this woman by the name of Vaia. Hopefully it'll come up. Anyway, I'll start telling the story because, I've only got 5 minutes. So Vaia is this, so she was educated at we have a college, we have a few colleges in fact, but we've got a college, a girls' college in Samoa that's run by the Congregational Church, Papauta. And Papauta Girls' College was originally set up in the 1800s to provide wives for ministers. So they'll get educated in a lot of subjects. They'll get taught, how to sew, how to cook, all those type of things, skills that are necessary, so that eventually, when they finish their time at school, they'll marry one of the students who, a couple of the students will by the end of their studies, they'll need a wife, and this is where they get their wife from. So one such student was this woman named Vaia, who completed her studies in 1898. And at the completion of her studies, sometime afterwards, she married a fourth-year Malua student by the name of Maene. And so at the completion of their studies, they requested they want to do missionary work. And this was back in the time where the zeal for missionary work was quite phenomenal. That, ministers and students that were finishing their time at college would much rather go and become missionaries to places like Papua New Guinea, Kiribati, and all these other neighboring countries, rather than looking after local parishes, which is sort of turned on its head at the moment, where we don't have any missionaries anymore going outside. They're all more interested in local churches. Anyway. So this couple went and they worked in a village in Papua New Guinea. I think it's Lelehoa. If the slides come up, you'll get the proper name. And they worked there for 6 years. And then after 6 years, they go for furlough to have a break. And then they come back and continue on for another 6 years. So they went to Samoa, back to Samoa, had a break. And then upon their return, Maene, the minister, he passed away. He contracted a very severe illness along with other people on the ship, and so they did a burial at sea, and the woman continued on to Papua New Guinea just by herself, Vaia, with her children, to continue on the missionary work. And basically there was this there was a whole lot of uncertainty about what was going on, because She wanted to continue the work, but the missionaries at the time were saying, well, we can't have a woman working by herself there. Either she remarries another minister or we get someone else in there altogether. However, there was a bit of tension in that regard because the church in Papua New Guinea didn't want anyone else. They wanted Vaea. So what happened was the missionaries who, were European, English to be in fact, because I hear, Janet, that English don't like being called Europeans. Anyway, in historical records, the English missionaries were saying, well, we'll leave you there. We'll leave you there and we'll just wait. The history records doesn't say wait on the Spirit, but I imagine this is where the Spirit started to speak. Because in 1911, I think the year was, the church then had to make a decision on whether to accept this advance from the village for her to be the minister. And they voted unanimously to accept Vaea as their new minister. So she became the first, and to this day, the only woman to be ordained in the Congregational Church. So there's precedence there for women to be ordained, but our elders are ignoring it for some reason. Patriarchy, hashtag patriarchy. So just thinking along that, and that's pretty much the story. So I guess Yuvkesh, the slides have been made redundant. But if we think along those lines of how the Spirit speaks, and if we just take a minute just to reflect, and we can through the story we can see that the Spirit speaks through the church as a collective, rather than decisions made by an individual or a number of individuals. We see that the Spirit also breaks borders, breaks boundaries. It dismantles systems, and those borders are gender borders, cultural borders, racial borders. Because one of the things that Vaea was concerned about was whether this judgment upon her was because of the color of her skin. Was it because her skin was black? In fact, were the words that were recorded. So the Spirit also, we can see in this, it moves like the moana, the ocean, because a lot of all this is happening at the ocean, in the ocean space, right? The movement of the moana, the Spirit sort of resonates that movement, this whole organic movement. It's fluid. It doesn't just, it's not controlled by any other, mechanism or a system. In fact, the Spirit dismantles systems of patriarchy, systems of oppression. And so in that story, we see that the Spirit does a lot of things, and it speaks through a lot of ways. So here we go. So just get to the last slide, please, Yuvkesh. So there. And this is what I wanted us to the Spirit speaks through the church as a collective. The Spirit empowers and breaks borders, gender, race, cultural. The Spirit dismantles systems of patriarchy, tradition, systems of mission. The Spirit moves like the moana, generating organic movements. So, yeah, I think that's my 5 minutes. Yeah, Janet. All right, thanks.
Maybe we can have a copy of the slides, Brian, if we can make those available to people. Have you seen the film, Moana? Yes? We've got two guests with us from the Council for World Mission. And then Charles, if you come up after they've been up. So Melanie and Mark are working through the Council for World Mission, which is another, which was what the London Missionary Society has sort of evolved into. It's more complicated than that, but and they're working at the Pacific Theological College, and it's very good while we're here to have them with us. And I think I've been talking long enough for them to come up to the front. Lovely, thank you.
Nisa Bulavanaka, how are we all this morning? And I thank the Spirit for moving that my presentation has managed to come up. Brian, I am so sorry, and I think that yours was more exciting than my slides. But obviously the Spirit has moved for my slides, so I'm grateful for that. As Janet has said, my name is Melanie Smith. I'm a United Reformed Church minister from the United Kingdom. My husband is the Reverend Mark Meacher, who is also a United Reformed Church minister. The United Reformed Church being a united church of Congregationalists mostly, and a number of Presbyterians, and then some Churches of Christ back in 1980 as well. Council for World Mission is a worldwide organisation, but very much based on the missionary movements of the 19th century, and has gone through an awful lot of complicated changes, as Janet has said, and has recently come up with, we'll go back to the first slide, please, a vision statement, which is life-flourishing communities living out God's promise of a new heaven and a new earth. Now that is a big vision, and that is a big vision for the Spirit to speak to us. So back a little bit to the next one, to the history. So it's a worldwide partnership of 32 member churches, mostly congregational, but also Presbyterian and Uniting churches, with that brief history. So we've now been around for 50 years as an organisation, and in that time has moved on dramatically from how it heard the voice of the Spirit going out around the globe to convert, to how now we can be a network of people serving each other in mission. And so with the next slide, we see that we now have the Partner in Mission programme, and this is how we work through partnership. So Mark and I are serving as partners in mission through the CWM with the Pacific Theological College here. So the CWM facilitates the sharing of people as a means of deepening partnership and mutual support for member churches and partner organisations to carry out God's mission. We engage in a variety of service, including pastoral ministry, theological education, community development, and so on and so forth. In hearing what the Spirit has been saying to an old missionary organisation with its roots in colonialism and also partners, it has to be said, with the slave trade. Can I have the next slide, please? We now have got a new project which has roots in our work looking at the legacies of slavery and how that impact on mission. So we have, as CWM, are seeking to address the roots of racialized inequalities and injustices that exist within our family of churches and the wider world, recognizing that they are embedded in our history of CWM's forebears. And the story of I knew I would never be able to say his name as soon as I got up here. I could say it every time to myself. You know his name. You know what he did. I'm not going to preach it to you, sisters and brothers. You know who he is. And he offers a biblical story to open up the issues of enslavement, release, confession, and discipleship. So Legacies of Slavery is working as a voice with the Spirit to see about how we can publicly apologize and repent as churches for our roles in slavery, talking about the reparation for victims and also research and publications going forward. But it's not just the past, it's modern day slavery as well, identifying those modern forms, racial injustices, and so projects initiated by member churches in our regions. It's about education for liberation, how the Spirit is talking to us about setting people free, training and community development, alternative theological education, of which PTC is trying to say education, theological education has always been top-down. How can we be communities-based, learning from indigenous communities and spiritualities, and talking about how that moves the Spirit forward, that Spirit that has been speaking for generations upon generations upon generations through the sea, through the Spirit, through the sky, through the earth, through the plants, through the animals. What can we learn from that? And thinking about ecumenism still, because we are a global institution that is of more than one denomination or church heritage. What can that say to the churches about how we move forward in tackling the legacies of slavery? Next slide, please. We're working about life flourishing, creation and economy. These are the things that the Spirit is moving the churches to as far as we can see, and how CWM can support in doing that. In terms of life flourishing creation, CWM's understanding of God's missional call is for us to become subversive disciples, to dismantle the empires of death and destruction that thwart flourishing of life. We note that those that are least responsible for the ecological crisis are those that are forced to bear the gravest consequences. And it shows how the interlocking systems of oppression, such as racism, patriarchy, economic injustices, casteism, and ableism, are intrinsically connected with the ecological crisis. These are not separate. These are all intertwined in empire and its pervasive nature. But there is a special thing that CWM are trying to address in terms of economy. And Rising to Life is a subversive witness that defies the market forces which commodify and annihilates life for the benefit of profit. Life-flourishing economy is an economy that embeds defiance against neoliberalism, capitalism, as an idolatrous system which desecrates and destroys life. It is a call to heal the world with an alternative economy of life and the celebration of abundant life. The next slide, please. So putting that into practice, we're doing that through theological education for economy of life, TEAL program. And this has been launched in the Philippines and hopefully coming to a PTC near you soon. It's a modular MTH degree, completely online, and really challenging how we see economy and empire and monetary systems. If we look at next slide again. So going back beyond the TEAL, there's also NIFIA, the New International Finance and Economic Architecture, something that I've personally been involved with and have been involved in the Europe and Caribbean arm of CWM, and been looking about what economy could look like if we're talking about God's economy of life rather than destructive force of neoliberal capitalism. It started through a project back in 2012, and it works not just through CWM, but also the World Council of Churches, the World Communion of Reformed Churches, the Lutheran World Federation, and the World Methodist Council. So this is a really important piece of work. And if we go on to the next slide, please. One of those pieces of work, and I can say his name, Zacchaeus, that ZACTAX toolkit, for instance, is a toolkit which enables and educates churches to organise around the question of tax justice. tax justice is an issue that all of us are involved with. And in fact, as part of my work at PTC, I was recently asked to contribute to the church's response to the new government's fiscal policies. And so whether we have a lot of taxes in our countries or very little taxes, the way that we deal with tax as a nation questions about how we feel about God's economy. It covers, the toolkit covers theological and taxation issues within the Zacchaeus story to equip and enable churches to take up the role of encouraging national and international systems of taxation that reward work, redistribute gains, promote gender justice and ecological sustainability, and penalise the public bads. We talk about public good a lot. We need to talk about public bads as well, such as speculative, polluting, and resource depleting activities. I could go on for a load more time about what CWM is doing at the moment and how we see the Spirit has been moving through this organisation to really transform it and become a very radical voice for change and transformation, and how we want to support our member churches in that role. How we believe that as international global Christian organisations, we can live out God's promise of a new heaven and a new earth through theological engagement with member churches and wider structures in society. So thank you, Janet, for this opportunity.
I'm in the very happy position of having had far too much material for this session, which is great. It's much more important to hear live voices from among us. So I'm just giving notice to the tech people that we won't be using the last 2 clips. Okay, but we will be hearing from Charles in a moment. But just to say that all those clips are on the website, aren't they? There's about a dozen or 15 of those full interviews with people from around the world. But we were going to talk a little bit about transforming local churches and the way that can be done. So Charles, come and tell us a bit about that.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you. And my testimony, if you will, is a bit different than what we've heard, but it is, I think, very connected and related in terms of the Spirit moving in mission and in missional ways that has become, in certain circles of church life, very much discussed and talked about. My particular local church is located in North America, in the state of Michigan, right in sort of the middle of the country and to the north. A lot of bodies of water around it, smaller than oceans, larger than ponds. And I live in the context of metropolitan Detroit. And so I'm in more of a suburban context to the much larger metropolitan Detroit context. Our church was, for a lot of reasons that I don't want to make it complex, but for a lot of reasons, we had an opportunity brought to us. And it's been almost 3 years now that opportunity came to us to sell our building and grounds. And along with 2 other businesses on either side of us, one to the north, one to the south, we could sell and do something with that money. Perhaps rebuild, perhaps do ministry in another way, but whatever it was, we had that option before us. It was dependent upon us going along with that because they wanted all those pieces of land. Our congregation did a lot of prayerful discernment took an electronic poll ahead of time and found that there was unanimous agreement with selling our building and grounds, which we did not anticipate. Going into the actual vote, we presented it to the congregation 1 week. Next week we did the poll. The third week we took the vote. And it was absolutely, as the electronic survey had shown us, that 100% were in favor of selling our building and grounds and moving. Of course, we didn't know where we were going to go. And our congregation, and I would commend you to look at, and I can't tell you which one it is, I'm going to say winter maybe of last year, of the Congregationalist magazine of the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches has a full article about this process. So I will commend you to look at that if you want to hear more details about how we went about doing what we did. But we formed 4 committees, and one of them was called Finding a Facility. And I was very involved in that committee, and that was really the first committee that went to work. The others were, one other was working side by side with that. But in 2 months' time, barely 2 months' time, we looked at over 60 different locations. And long story short, in that, we had an invitation from a local Reformed Jewish synagogue that was 3 miles from our previous building. And after discernment and another congregational vote, that was almost unanimous, almost by one, off by one. But we did vote to accept the offer to rent from this synagogue, and that rental agreement included worship space on Sunday morning and special services, and some modest office space. That was a big issue for me, not just for me to have an office, but for there to be a center for the activity of the church between Sundays. And so we have been doing that for almost 2 years now. We have been at Temple Shir Shalom in West Bloomfield, Michigan. We have partnered with Temple Shir Shalom on many projects, many outreaches to the community. We already had a relationship with Temple Shir Shalom in preparing food and taking it down to those who were hungry and those who were homeless, and those sorts of efforts have just continued. As an example, a few times during the year, a high holy day or a special sacred day falls, or an important day for the synagogue falls on a Sunday, and we're told in advance, you need to do something else, maybe go on Zoom that day. Martin Luther King weekend, this last year, our first Martin Luther King Jr. weekend with them, they have what's called Tikkun Olamathon. Tikkun Olam is, in Hebrew, repairing the world. That's how it often gets translated. And for practical purposes, repair the world. And they do various projects. They take their whole building, which is why we could not use our office space. We could not use, well, we could use our office space. We could not use the sanctuary. We could not use the library. But it was a lot of projects that were benefiting all kinds of people in the broader community. And making mats. I don't know if you're familiar with plarning. How many are familiar with plarning? Okay, plarning. Wow, okay. Yeah, I'm not a plarner. That's not my skill, but it's weaving out of all those plastic bags that we get from grocery stores and other places, weaving them into mats that are then given to people who are home-based challenged, that they can use that for a little bit of comfort. And there are groups, our benevolence board has been involved with that for quite a while. But anyway, there was that. There was packaging food, sandwiches for homeless people that would be taken down. There were other projects. I'm not sure what all was going on. But our church had a decision. Do we just go on Zoom and have an ordinary Zoom service, or do we join them and participate? So we decided, and it was a lot of back and forth, but we decided, no, we're going to do a short service, include the people on Zoom, 15 minutes, in the office, and then everybody, if they wanted to, could go and participate in projects. My takeaway from that was, at the end of the day, as I thought about what would I say to people who asked what I did today, it was really unusual because there was a point in the day where I was surrounded by people from Temple Shir Shalom. A lot of our folks were participating too, but they were just at other places. I was surrounded by people from Temple Shir Shalom, and for whatever reason, my gift in the process was being able to fit those sandwiches properly in the bags. That was my contribution, and somehow that was something that was helpful to somebody. So it was really funny. The majority, most of the sandwiches we made were ham sandwiches. So I'm vegetarian. I'm surrounded by Jewish people. So what did you do today? Oh, I helped make some ham sandwiches with some Jewish people. And I knew that if I answered that, it would, I would get a lot of looks. But anyway, it was a wonderful experience, and it was a great bonding experience. So I just say that the Spirit can move in a variety of ways. We have known that, we've gone through a whole revitalization process, and I'm very, very, very sorry. My little editorial comment here, I'm very, very sorry that this program is not still used by our national association, but the Center for Parish Development had a really great program on revitalization. And I think my home church of Marshalltown, Iowa, just coincidentally, and Pine Hill, my current church, are the only two churches that actually went through the whole program and process, but it helped us immeasurably. We had no idea when we signed up what we were going to be going through in these last 3 years, but it has really helped us to identify some things and prepare ourselves. We know that the synagogue is not our final place. It's not our final home, but I think it's been really exciting to see the Spirit move us and be able to use us and bring us together in these really meaningful ways. I will ask for prayers. My final statement here, again, as the Spirit moves us. I learned this morning, about 5 minutes before boarding the bus, that because of the massive building addition, the synagogue has been under massive construction. Most of the last 6-8 months, it's been a lot of construction. They are way ahead of schedule. Fortunately for them, that will mean bringing all of their kids out of, they've been shipping their kids on Sunday mornings to another synagogue. Now they're going to have space to bring them in on Sunday mornings. That means that there is, even though there's more space generally, we are going to have to move after December. So I just ask, but we're prepared for that. There's already been a meeting. I'm on sabbatical. I'm not part of those meetings, but I'm glad to be given the heads up. But I do ask for prayers because the Spirit continues to move us, and we know that there will be another place. We know that there will be another venue for us to do ministry. We may be ready to purchase a full building on our own. We may continue to do other things. We may go on Zoom for a while, but the Spirit continues to move us. That's almost my final thing, very final thing. I think that we're seeing more stories like this. At one point, I knew of 4 churches in the state of Michigan. That was over 1/15 of our churches that were looking at selling their building and grounds, and most of those have been accomplished now. Sadly, many of those communities, maybe with the exception of Pine Hill, have chosen to completely close and dissolve as an organization. I don't know how this translates in other parts of the world, but I'm a big campaigner for making sure that we as leaders in our congregational organizations are truly equipping our congregations, our local churches, for listening to the Spirit and heeding the Spirit's call and resourcing how churches in similar situations can respond and move forward in different ways. We're very fortunate. We chose to take this opportunity. We also recognize that, we were also looking at other realities too, that, down the road, we might not get an offer like this and we might need it more than we did in 2020. It puts churches in a vulnerable situation. But again, if we trust in the Spirit's movement, I think it can be really exciting what can take place. But my word is, please help resource your local congregations in doing this, because it's going to happen more and more. Thank you.